I am the hammer of justice.
Holla ballers, and welcome once again to your Prot Paladin guide for 7.25 onwards. It's going to be all good with this flashy beast. We're going to talk about layering, and also I believe this is the best tank to get you started into tanking, if that's something you're interested in. So let's go. So let us check out how we set up our Protection Paladin once again. So I have recorded this guide before, but I made some very silly errors due to being tired, unfortunately. So apologies to those guys, and thank you to the kind people who were just like, yeah, let's change these few things, it's all good. So let's look at it. What are our stats to kick off with? Well, first of all, let's check out what our mastery does. Our mastery increases our damage reduction from Shield of the Righteous. This is going to be our big form of active mitigation. It has 3 charges, right? It slams the target with your shield, causing some holy damage, and reduces damage you take by 41%. Good God almighty, for 4.5 seconds. That's pretty fucking good, right? But not only that, while you're standing in your consecration, Shield of the Righteousness effects are increased by 20%. So watch. Boosh! There you go, 49% damage reduction just because I casted my consecration. So what you're already starting to see is that Blizzard implemented some synergies with the Prot Paladin. And that's fantastic, because the original version of the Prot Paladin back in the early days of Legion was horrible. It had no synergy. It was basically whack-a-mole play. But now, not really the case, although a lot of it is tied to consecration. So what we have is this ability that reduces our damage taken by essentially 50% for my Paladin, and that's on... My Paladin stats are all over the place, because I play Holy, Ret, and this is one of 12 characters, of course, that I play. So you guys can obviously focus a little bit better on that. So that's what our Mastery does, and it also increases our chance to block melee attacks by 23%. Also increases your attack power, so that might seem kind of good. Unfortunately, though, it's just not, generally speaking. The Prot Paladin's main aim is to always be under the effects of some kind of mitigation. Okay? When they're not, they are extremely susceptible to being smacked in the face and dying. And this is a very big issue. When I tanked Kill Jaden on this guy for the very first time, he had under 5 million HP. Whether or not you know it or not, Kill Jaden can hit you for over 6 normally. I spot some error there, right? They are one of the tanks that needs to be thinking very, very extensively about what they have up to reduce the damage they take, because if you don't, then you really get hurt, which means we're going to be talking about something you might see pop up elsewhere, which is called layering, and that's layering mitigation to ensure that your damage intake is smooth. Smooth damage intake is the aim of any tank in World of Warcraft. What that means is that your health bar isn't going no damage, no damage, no damage. Spiked! Now he's nearly dead. Oh my god, heal him with everything. No damage, no damage, no damage. Spike! And because when that happens, if you're not aiming to create this smooth damage intake, is healers don't know when to heal you and for how much. And that's a big problem for the healers. If you're susceptible to spiking really hard and losing loads of HP, healers are going to start spending way more expensive big heals on you than necessary, because they can't trust you not to suddenly be near death, and that's terrible for them. What they want to do is be very efficient with their healing, so they have more mana, makes fights last longer, and you have this synergetic combo going on between you and the healers. So the way the Paladin achieves that is by having always pretty much something up that is reducing the damage you take, and then layering extra mitigation on top for the bigger hits. So you might keep something pretty standard up like Shield of the Righteous as much as humanly possible. That's going to smooth your damage intake from the normal attacks, and then when bigger attacks come in, you layer that with something else. And that means that that big damage is also reduced down to what's normally taking, and overall, your health bar is nicely dipping, it's nicely going back up, but you're not in terrible, terrible danger all the time, and healers can rely on you to be looking out for them. Some other passives we have here before we continue with the stats, just so you're aware of them. The Grand Crusader. When you avoid a melee attack or use Hammer of the Righteous, you have a 25% chance to reset the remaining cooldown on Avenger's Shield. And this is one of our most awesome spells ever. We're going to talk about it in a minute. Okay, so if Mastery's not super amazing, what do we take? Haste. Haste, 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 haste. It doesn't matter if you're going for pure survivability or pure DPS. Haste is your go-to. Haste gives us our spells back more often, as simple as that. That's the big deal. More haste we've got, you can see here, like Shield of the Righteous is down to 12.5 second recharge. If I remove some, again, my gear is utterly terrible. I apologize to all the prop paladins out there. But you can see if I take that off, the cooldown increases to 12.7 seconds. Put that back on, so I've got more haste, 12.5. The more haste we have, the more often we have access to our mitigation abilities. And what did I just tell you? It's all about smoothing out our damage mitigation, right? Keeping it up as much as possible. We realistically always want to be under some kind of mitigation in most scenarios. Ergo, we need more access to our cooldowns, right? So passively, it increases our mitigation, makes life much easier for us and the healers, and we increase our damage as well by being able to use all our spells on a much more regular basis. It also gives a nice flow to the spec, a really nice flow to the spec, which is what we want, okay? So we get this nice, smooth, and fast gameplay, which keeps us engaged and keeps us interested. So that's generally the idea with the stats. So haste overwhelmingly. After that, you can kind of pick, right? We have this wonderful freedom as a prop paladin to decide what's going to be best in the situation we are in. As a tank, we can go through periods where we're very undergeared and we really care about survivability, right? We are like just entering new content perhaps, or a boss that we know specifically wants to crush our soul into the next week. If that's the case, we're going to look at something like haste, versatility, mastery, and then our worst stat is going to be crit. Why versatility? Versatility affects pretty much everything we do, and you can see my versatility is 379 on my prop paladin. Again, I'm sorry, I can't be picky or choosy with my gear. Versatility, increased damage and healing done, right? That's great, and we're going to be doing a lot of self-healing. We're going to talk about that in a second. And it decreases the damage taken just by everything. And that includes magical damage, right? So it's really important that we build up our versatility for survivability. Unless we're going for big dick damage. If you're going for big damage, then crit overtakes both mastery and versatility. Because unfortunately, crit does not scale particularly well with things like self-healing. But what it does do is just gives us enormous damage on the rapid fire attacks of the spells we're going to be fighting. We're still going to be promoting haste #1 overall. But if we want to do way more damage, let's say we're overgeared now, we're definitely not in danger of dying here, right? Unless something goes horribly, horribly wrong. Then we can push our crit up nice and heavy. Moving on then, so that's our stat priority. What about talents then? Let's talk about the spells we're going to be using first of all. We've already talked about Shield of the Righteous and it has 3 charges. We obviously want this to be constantly recharging. So I would recommend, we're going to talk about this later, but some way of tracking this. Now, what you can't do is get loads of them because you can with certain talents and then spam them. It will cap out very quickly. So you do have to manage this pretty regularly rather than just mindlessly spamming it and going for like trying to get some sort of like 3-minute Shield of the Righteous time. You can't do that anymore, unfortunately. What we do have, though, is Judgment. Judges the target, dealing 200,000 holy damage, and reduces the remaining cooldown on Shield of the Righteous by 2 seconds or 4 seconds on a critical strike. You can see how now crit actually plays into some synergy should we want to use it. So Judgment reduces the cooldown of Shield of the Righteous. Again, we want to be under as much mitigation as possible. That means it's important that we have Shield of the Righteous recharging when we press Judgment in order to gain the benefit of the fact that it reduces the cooldown. On top of that, we have Blessed Hammer. Throws a Blessed Hammer, it spirals outward. This is the talented version, I might add. Okay, it replaces Hammer of the Righteous, which you already have, which has 3 charges on it as well. Okay, we're going to be taking this in most scenarios anyway, so it's not worth me going and respecking right now. And what it does is it goes out and does some damage ordinarily if you haven't got it as Blessed Hammer, but if you do have it as Blessed Hammer, it causes the enemy's hit to deal 12% less damage. So you can see here, they get a debuff, this Blessed Hammer, 12% reduced auto attack damage. I want to make sure that is absolutely clear. Absolutely clear that it is the auto attack damage. Now that varies, and this is where a good tank knows what's dangerous about what boss. Yeah, you need to know what's dangerous about that boss. So learning about the auto attack damage and whether or not that's a super danger to you or not is going to be important. And obviously if you're dealing with many mobs like Mythic Plus or something like that, they mostly auto attack against you, which means that is far more beneficial in those scenarios. Our other ability is Avenger's Shield. We want this recharging because of course it can proc and reset. Hurls your shield at an enemy target, dealing 230,000 holy damage, interrupts and silences for 3 seconds. So a big part of tanking is gathering mobs. Gathering mobs into one place so people can effectively AoE them down. A bad situation to be in is tanking like 4 or 5 mobs here while there is a mob over here just casting spells and not being DPS down. You're also not damaging it, so you're losing threat on it maybe to the healer. And if it's a caster mob, what you can do is throw your Avenger's Shield when it's casting, interrupt it, bring it all the way back, and now you've got what we call the death ball. The death ball is super important. You want the death ball. So it interrupts and it silences. Very, very important. A good tip, and I know this is, I would recommend watching my tanking series. There's 5 videos there on getting into tanking, which I can tell you thousands and thousands of people have really benefited from. If this was a big long line of mobs and there's like casters over here, what I would probably do as the tank is I would run in and I would Avengers Shield the caster and then move to this location, and that's going to bring them all together. So Avengers Shield resetting and being able to do all those things is crucially important to managing this. Not only that, it does huge amounts of damage. Consecration. So Consecration is just dropping the Consecration on the floor, and it has lots of synergy with various abilities, okay? It has lots and lots of synergy. We're going to be looking at it soon. You can spec out of that synergy should you want to, but you definitely want it. You want the benefits of Shield of the Righteous, which is 20%, and certainly on our Light of the Protector or Hand of the Protector, depending on what you want to use. It's a crucially important as well. While you're standing in your Consecration, Hand of the Protector's healing is increased by 20%. So I've talked about our offensive abilities and one of our defenses. Hand of the Protector, I am going to spec out of this just for a moment. Hand of the Protector is our self-heal. And our self-heal is actually very, 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 very good. It's something that, certainly when it was initially brought in, I didn't like. I do not like the idea of tanks that try and take damage and then heal it back afterwards. It's something I find kind of annoying, although I still criminally enjoy the Death Knight a lot. But the standard spell is called Light of the Protector. It has an 11-second cooldown. It calls down the light to heal you for 30% of your missing health. So it gets better the more health you're missing. While standing in your Consecration, Light of the Protector's healing is increased by 20%. It does a huge amount of healing. An absolutely huge amount of healing. And it's actually going to become one of your main survival spells. This shouldn't be looked at as some sort of emergency spell. This is a natural, constant part of your rotational abilities. You want to be getting a lot of use out of this. And we're going to look at talents later where even if you don't need it, you can still make maximum use out of it. And that's something you really want to take into account. On top of that, we have Interrupt. It's obviously leaving casters just casting bolts into your face is never a good idea. Interrupt them when you can. We have our Taunt. And we also have our Artifact ability. So we talked about layering earlier. So we talked about Shield of the Righteous and Light of the Protector. Those are kind of like your go-to mitigation spells. Yes, healing is a form of mitigation because you won't need healing after it, especially if you time it right. Boss is casting something horrible at me. Oh no, oh no, no, no. It hit me instantly. Light of the Protector. I back off that damage, right? That's a really nice thing for the healers to see. Our artifact ability of the Eye of Tyr is on a 1-minute cooldown, which means we can use it very regularly. Releases a blinding flash from Truth Guard, it causes some damage, but most importantly, it reduces all damage that the mobs deal to you by 25% for 9 seconds. It's an awesome ability. It's kind of boring in what it does. I mean, it's not impressive, right? It's not impressive, but the actual practical effect of it is fucking awesome. Really, really good. 25% damage reduction for 9 seconds. Baby, I will take that in some many, many scenarios. Eye of Tyr has pulled me right out of the shit. And I've been tanking quite a lot of my Paladin recently, and believe you me, awesome. Let's look at Avenging Wrath. Another big cooldown, 2-minute cooldown. Increases all damage done, of course, but remember, increases healing done by 35%. What did we just talk about? Our healing done. And this comes in a number of other forms. We also have things like Lay on Hands. Massive cooldown, but heals the friendly target for an amount equal to your maximum health. You're a tank. It heals for tons, especially on yourself. It's so, so important that you want to manage this effectively. We also have some Shield Wall ability. 5-minute cooldown. Empowers you with the Spirit of the Ancient Kings, reducing all damage you take by 50% for 8 seconds. Enormous cooldown, right? You can see its damage reduction is only on par with Shield of the Righteous, and you might be confused by why is my ability that's only on 12 seconds doing as much as my 5-minute cooldown. And it's all because it's about this layering aspect. Yeah, it's about building cooldowns on top of cooldowns for those dangerous environments. The game kind of takes for granted that you're probably under the effects of Shield of the Righteous for most occasions, right? It takes that into account. So in order to kill a prot paladin, you can't just say, oh, well, let's not give them any more cooldowns because they have Shield of the Righteous. What they do is they plan around you having a smaller health pool, being a little bit more in danger from certain attacks, and therefore you're layering these cooldowns on top of each other. And along with that, we have Ardent Defender, a 1.33 minute cooldown, again affected by haste, making it super valuable. Reduces all damage you take by a further 20% for 8 seconds. When our defender is active, the next attack that would otherwise kill you will instead bring you to 12% of your maximum health. Now, bear in mind, you can't soak ludicrous things with this. It's 200% of your max HP. So it's like, for my Paladin, anything over 12 million is going to kill me even if I had Ardent Defender up, right? Pretty much that's what's going to happen. So something you bear in mind. I also want to point out here is Divine Shield. Divine Shield is a tank cooldown. As much as people like to avoid it, because obviously if you cast it on yourself, then the enemy will stop attacking you. But a lot of enemies fixate certain attacks on you, right? They start channeling them into you, which means they can't switch it to another target. And that absolutely means you can Divine Shield it off or clear extremely nasty debuffs. You can get rid of them. Not only that, you should have it macroed like I have, which is a cancel aura macro. That means I can pop Divine Shield and then instantaneously cancel it. So it shouldn't get anybody killed. If you watch how quick this comes on and off, you can watch the buff up here. It's gone. Right, it's gone as fast as I've put it up, and it's just disappeared, which means I can carry on tanking as normal. Not only that, we have a Cleanse Toxins. Yes, you can dispel yourself. So important. Well, I don't know why tanks don't fucking do this, but it drives me mad when I'm healing them, is that you can cleanse poison and diseases off yourself. If you have a reasonable UI, something will change color if you have a debuff on you that can be dispelled by yourself, and therefore being able to just run and dispel yourself is really good. And you should be taking advantage of that rather than just taking all that dot damage. And there are many scenarios like Cathedral of the Eternal Night where you can get great benefit out of that. Carrying on, we have Divine Steed, our movement ability. Oh, blood DKs, aren't you sour? Aren't you sour? It's so wonderful. Giving a great pace to the prot Paladin. Although, I've got to say, it has a relatively long cooldown, which can make you feel slow when charging up certain environments for sure. But you're not as slow as others, so I wouldn't complain too much if I were you. You do have a ability that you don't have to target something for. It is just a straight movement speed, and it is extremely useful. Watching our prot Paladin dive around on Mythic Gul'dan was very, very interesting to see, and just laughing over a lot of the abilities. So those are the spells you're going to be using with your prot Paladin. You can see there's some synergies, basically based around consecration, and this idea of layering cooldowns on top of each other. So let's look at some talents you might want to take. Holy Shield increases your block chance by 15% and allows you to block spells, okay? And your successful blocks deal 42,000 holy damage to your attacker. Now, you might say, oh, I can block spells. That's fucking dope. I'm going to take that anytime there's magical damage. You can't rely on block that much. You do have a chance to block, and it does increase your chance to block, but it's still not reliable. So if you're using this to mitigate something huge and magical, then that's probably not going to be reliable, and you want reliability for that smooth damage intake, alright? So bear that in mind, is you have better ways of managing big major threats. And if you're taking constant magical damage, though, on a regular basis, then this is absolutely fantastic, right? Because it's going to proc in a lot of occasions. It won't proc for like one spell at 3 minutes. It's probably not going to proc then. But in other occasions, absolutely. Blessed Hammer we just talked about gets rid of Hammer of the Righteous. Now, this is what you're going to take depending again on scenario. You've got to think about what the spells do. So this one again reduces the auto attack damages we talked about earlier and works on all mobs around you, particularly great in dungeons and whatnot. You're going to be taking this in most scenarios because even boss auto attacks hit very, very hard. Taking 12% of that sting out is really nice. Now, I talked about the synergy with Consecration. Consecrated Hammer, Hammer of the Righteous has no cooldown, so you can spam it. Hammer of the Righteous, Shield of the Righteous, and Light of the Protector now always get the benefit of Consecration. So this is what I call the Paladin, the great introductory tank. Because you can spec into something like Consecrated Hammer. It's clearly worse than the other two. Well, what it does do is means while you're still getting used to pressing your abilities and buttons, and I want to give some perspective to long-time prot paladins here, there are plenty of people who find managing all these spells as kind of like a tricky system, right? That's still a lot going on. So if you're not used to that yet, and you want to get some time to do things without suffering, like missing out on all that 20%, then you could take Consecrated Hammer and have an easier time of it, where the spec does become a little bit more whack-a-mole, there's no doubt about it. It does become a little bit more like press whatever's not on cooldown and you'll be fine. But that's great while you're learning to actually tank, right? While you're learning to actually control enemies and control bosses and all that kind of stuff. Really good if you want to take it for that reason, but it is worse than the other two, and hopefully now you can decide between the other two. Level 30, First Avenger. Avenger Shield now deals 50% increased damage to the first target hit, and Grand Crusader now has an additional 10% chance to occur. So Grand Crusader is the Avenger Shield reset. This gives you huge amounts of damage, but you might think, oh, is that just straight damage? No, it is not. No, it is not. It actually works in synergy with the Bulwark of Order. Avenger's Shield also shields you for 8 seconds, absorbing 50% as much damage as it's dealt. So that buff actually has some mitigation to it, which I don't think a lot of people realize. They see it as just, oh, my fucking shield's just going to do shitloads more damage. Whee! But it's actually providing you some mitigation, whether you realize it or not. Bastion of Light, though, immediately grants 3 charges of Shield of the Righteous. So in some scenarios, so I'm specifically looking at bosses like Kill Jaden, where you are under enormous pressure to make sure you have mitigation up for a huge majority of the fight. Bastion of Light, and even if it's a new scenario where you're just not sure how often you're going to be damaged, if it's risky progress or something like that, this 2-minute cooldown, Bastion of Light, gives you 3 charges of Shield of the Righteous, so it effectively guarantees you so much more uptime on your Shield of the Righteous that you can be so much more relaxed. And I think that's important while tanking, is being relaxed. Knowing you are safe is way better than thinking, please, 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 please don't kill me, please don't kill me. You want to feel comfortable while you're tanking and relaxed. And Bastion of Light gives you this extra cooldown to get you more Shields of the Righteous so you can feel more relaxed in that scenario. Crusader's Judgment now. Judgment now has 2 charges, and Grand Crusader now also grants a charge of Judgment. Frankly, we have enough to do. When you do play with enough haste, this is just not that beneficial. It's as simple as that. It's just not that beneficial. It adds more buttons to be pressing, which you don't really need as a prot paladin. You have other things you can be focusing on, and we'll talk about them shortly. Crusader's Judgment just doesn't stand a candle to these two, really. Level 45, some CC, pick whatever you want. Dungeons, Blinding Light, just to disorientate enemies for a moment, stop a load of spell cast, whatever you want to do. Entirely down to you. Level 60, Blessing of Spell Warning. So let's talk about our blessings. As a paladin, not just a prot paladin, we bring a ton of utility to the raid. And that's utility we want to make good use out of. So the first one is Blessing of Freedom. Blessing of Freedom can actually prevent huge amounts of damage. There are lots of abilities in Legion that actually pin people or stop their mobility and simultaneously cause them huge amounts of damage. Being able to actually just break that makes all that damage go away and is super helpful. Blessing of Protection prevents all physical damage going to a target, so you can use this a number of ways. Somebody's got to soak something, perhaps, in some raid. I can't imagine which one. But you can Blessing of Protection them. Or you lost aggro on an enemy and you have nothing left right now and you're busy and it's going to the healer. You can Blessing of Protection them. I keep calling it hand. You also have a Blessing of Sacrifice. Very, 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 very amazing. It places a blessing on a party or raid member, okay? So you can't do it to yourself, which sucks. You can't do it to yourself. So you have this cooldown that you have passively that you can use on other people. Places a blessing on a party or raid member, transferring 30% of damage taken to you for 18 seconds. Yeah, you carry a tank cooldown for your tanking buddy. Yeah, you do. Or if someone's got to do something, again, like soak something really heavy and you don't want them to die, 30% damage reduction is fucking amazing. It's so good. So you can use this regularly. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown. Sacking people is a regular part of prot paladin gameplay, and you should get used to it. It lasts 18 seconds or until, 18 seconds lasts forever. Until the transferred damage will cause you to fall below 20% health. So it'll never kill you. It will never kill you, which is nice. And plus, you just have this amazing ability. Again, I don't see enough prot paladins sacking other people, and I think you should be getting to the habit of doing that. It's really, really important that you learn to do that. So what we could do, though, is swap our Blessing of Protection, if people aren't taking physical damage, to Blessing of Spell Warding, and this has proved critical in many raid scenarios. It places a blessing on a party or raid member, protecting them from all magical attacks. You can put this on yourself. Really good for things like Necrotic, yeah? Where you're taking all this nasty magical stuff, is you can spell ward yourself and prevent all that from happening. So this is a wonderful ability. So any scenario you can find a use for this, I would use it. Cavalier with that two charges on speed, though. If you just need the speed and there's no magical damage to be bothered with, you want this 2 charges because that movement speed is all good. Without it, believe me, you will feel bleeding slow unless you have some ridiculous speed set. You want Cavalier for those 2 charges. Retribution Aura protects yourself and all party and raid members in 60 yards with an aura that deals 3,000 holy damage and when melee attacked. Well, there aren't many occasions where people other than you or your tanking buddy are being meleeed, right? So it's basically just for you, and also it does come with some bugs. You're going to be rolling Cavalier in most scenarios unless you can get use out of Blessing of Spell Warding. Level 75 then. Let's talk about Final Stand first. When you use Divine Shield, you also taunt all targets within 15 yards for 8 seconds. So there are situational uses for this. Obviously, with Divine Shield, you take no damage and you taunt everything. The problem I have with this talent is when you need it, you probably haven't spec'd it. And you can't really predict unless the situation definitely calls for it beforehand, or you build it into some kind of strategy to use this. And therefore, it's so situational, you're rarely ever going to select it. Knight Templar reduces the cooldown of Divine Steed by 50%, so more movement speed, but it also reduces all damage taken while mounted on your Divine Steed by 20%. So Divine Steed doesn't last an awful long time, right? But it is, yet again, another mitigation tool to layer on top of your others. So if you are dealing with something really, really difficult and you need more mitigation, you have this choice. In most scenarios, though, you're going to take Hand of the Protector, right? So it reduces the cooldown of the heal, right? Which means you're going to be able to heal more often. And not only that, you can heal other people with it. So I encourage you at some point to check out a Prot Paladin stream. You might not find that many of them out there anymore. Prot Paladins have kind of been abandoned by the top players. There are still some out there, obviously. But Hand of the Protector is basically what a lot of them do, especially when you are very heavily geared. And certainly if you're doing stuff like M+, the higher up you go, the more often you're going to be Hand of Protectoring people, because you should be at a gear level where you're comfortable in M+, and your healer is comfortable with you. And what you could do is drop massive heals on your party and raid. And you can be basically like an extra healer. It heals for that much, especially if you're comfortable in your tanking, to the point where you're not under any danger, that you can just spend nearly all your Hands of the Protectors on other people. Then you are in this awesome scenario where you can just be like, heal you, and you're just basically just this extra healer for the raid. It works so well, especially if you're doing content where you're having to drop a healer for extra DPS. You'll see Prot Paladins suddenly start popping up as this basically extra healer and tank. It's really important that you get used to using this. Level 98, just like a raid cooldown. It's a channel spell. It's one of those raid cooldowns that you think would always be taken and just isn't. It channels the Aegis of Light that protects you and all allies standing within 10 yards behind you, which can be a little wonky if you have to gather everybody up to use it. I still do a test, and I said this previously, is it looks cool. The problem with it is it's channeled, and it's only 20%. 20% is a lot, but you need people to be stood specifically here in a certain scenario. I've seen this used once as a test in one of our mythic progresses when we had a Prot Paladin. That was it. Every other time, something else was just flat out more beneficial than this 3-minute cooldown. And that will come mostly in the form of Judgment of Light. Judgment now applies Judgment of Light to the target, causing the next 40 successful attacks against the target to heal the attacker. So the more difficult content is, the less people are always at full health. And that means that Judgment of Light just does so much raid healing. So much raid healing, because you have such a short cooldown on Judgment that it's up all the goddamn time, and it just keeps healing and healing all the time. Consecrate Gown, though, up to 6 allies standing within your consecration receive some healing every 0.8 seconds. So again, this is if you're more enclosed, you can get this. But not only that, you have a slow. Why do people not realize Prot Paladins have slows? You do have a slow. I saw many people complaining about things like Necrotic with the Prot Paladin, without realizing they had consecrated ground. So if you need to do some kiting, things in your consecration move 50% slower. So if you can't rely on a slow from someone else, what you can do is just consecrate and you can get the fuck out of there real quick, and everything's slowed here while you reset your necrotic stacks. You can do all this kind of stuff. So I don't understand it, but there you go. There's a scenario you can use that in. At level 100. Last Defender. Each enemy within 8 yards reduces the damage that you take and increase the damage you deal by 3%. This effect has diminishing returns. So it needs quite a lot of enemies. I think it's like 4 or 5 all the time to be beneficial in some way. Whereas the other two are just constantly beneficial regardless of scenario. Even in a lot of Mythic Plus dungeons, and this guy's done a lot of 15s now, it's rarely useful. Righteous Protector. Okay, so I tend to favor Righteous Protector over Seraphim, much to the heresy of a lot of Prot Paladins, but this Paladin is not overgeared. He's 908, right? I'm not really feeling the Seraphim just yet, certainly when I'm doing the higher Mythic Pluses. If I'm tanking a 15 or a 16, no, not quite yet. Righteous Protector is the more survival-based talent. Shield of the Righteous reduces the remaining cooldown on Light of the Protector and Avenging Wrath by 3 seconds. So this is more of that healing spell. So I like this because sometimes I'm in some tricky scenarios, man. I'm in some tricky scenarios, and I am more than happy to gain that extra heal every now and again. I really am. Seraphim, though, the Light, 30-second cooldown. The Light temporarily magnifies your power. It increases your haste, crit, mastery, and versatility by 5,500. But it's going to eat your Shield of the Righteous charges. So you are giving up some survivability for much, much more damage. Much, much more damage. And some survivability, but not as much as you would gain survivability-wise by having 2 extra charges of Shield of the Righteous. So each Shield of the Righteous charge it consumes, it'll only eat 2 at max, gives you 8 seconds of Seraphim. Right? So you can have 16 seconds of Seraphim up, and it has a 30-second cooldown. So that should easily translate into about just over 50% of your time playing your prot Paladin is under the effects of Seraphim, doing tremendously more damage, right? Doing way, way more damage and just kicking ass and taking names. Again, as some Paladins will tell you, you should always take Seraphim in dungeons. Look, know what your Paladin is capable of and know what content you're going into. It's easy to say that, but there is a huge amount of variance in what affixes there are in Mythic Plus, how geared your Paladin is, how your stats are looking. I just told you haste is overwhelmingly the best stat. I have 10,000 haste, but I also have 10,000 crit, right? I have no versatility. I have 6,000 mastery because I can't be picky and choosy with my stats just yet. I can't do it. I have to take whatever I can get, which means know your Paladin and know what you're comfortable with. Just because some prot Paladin who has geared himself primarily to always be a prot Paladin and you just picked it up and you're basically like getting items with 30 item level upgrades and all this kind of stupid stuff that those guys aren't used to anymore, and they're like, you should always take Seraphim in dungeons. I'm telling you now, no, you don't have to. You will be doing, there's no doubt about that, you will be doing, but just disregarding survivability for the deeps ain't always a good idea. That's all I'm going to say. Because sometimes you're going to be like, I really, really wish I had a Shield of the Righteous right now. And I don't. And I don't. So that's going to be my closing word on it. Let's look at the gameplay then of the prot Paladin. So you can see the real synergy is keeping consecration down as much as possible. You want to be doing that at all times. Keep that consecration ticking, because unless you're taking consecrating hammer, it's going to be important to get all the benefit of these extra spells. On top of that, we want our Shield of the Righteous to never be at 3 charges, right? We never want this at 3 charges, because that means that when we Judgment, we're just wasting charges, and we don't want that to happen, because the more mitigation we have, the better. We've explained that a lot. Other than that, what you'll find is your Paladin very, very quickly falls into a similar sort of theme. We want to prioritize consecration, and we obviously want to prioritize our Judgment to get as many cooldown reductions on our Shield of the Righteous as possible, and you'll see how quickly it keeps coming up. Your gameplay is going to revolve around knowing your content. One thing I would say is you always kind of want to be under some kind of mitigation unless you obviously outgear the content, right? Unless you clearly outgear the content. But that means you should be looking for any and all opportunities to prepare yourself for the next moment. That means if a boss starts casting a spell that's not at you, or it does something where it intermissions for a moment, or it starts targeting other people, you should be aiming to learn to not press your Shield of the Righteous during that time, because that's not helping you at that point. You want mitigation of why you're being attacked, and a good lesson to get into, especially as you're gearing and you're not able to get massive cooldowns. And I would honestly say this, for the geared prot Paladins, they forget what it was like when your gear was much lower and you were really having to think about how you were going to get all your cooldowns back. Is try and just get the most effective use out of it, and then utilize layering on other cooldowns in order to magnify that experience. Let me spec out of Ages of Light before people get super pissed at me. That's what you want to be doing, is thinking about how to layer your cooldowns effectively and not being that guy who's like, oh my god, I think I might die. I have tier fucking shield wall, ardent defender, wings, and pop everything, because that's not what the prot Paladin is about, right? You don't need all these levels of mitigation at once. What you want to do is strategically plan out what this boss will do to you and how you can effectively counter it. In conclusion then, the prot Paladin has standby, and you can probably see why. This is a great tank to get started on, but it also offers a hell of a lot for high-end players. So there's no it tapers off and then you should go and play something else or anything like that. This is a spec that you can get into and people have stuck with for years and years, and for obvious reason. It's spectacular, it's bombastic, it has some interesting synergies going on with it, and some awesome utility. Some add-ons I'd recommend then are certainly Tell Me When or Weaker, so you can keep a track of things like your Shield of the Righteous, make sure you're under those effects. And also managing your cooldowns in a nice, comfortable, and safe way. Get used to using those. I would also recommend the Paladin Discord for further reading once you get up into the high tiers of gear and you're looking at legendaries and all that kind of stuff and how you might pick and choose between those. That'd be the Hammer of Wrath Discord. That's been absolutely fantastic. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy your prot Paladin. Send me them transmogs because they're always good. Bye bye.